Thank you, Tim. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Just going to turn this off. All right. So, tonight, we're going to talk about history, huh? I think the last time I spoke, we talked about science, and I told you I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to touch your hearts. All right. Today, we're going to talk about history, and I'm going to tell you again, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to touch your hearts. It's. I think we'll try, but this topic tonight um, will share with us, teach us a perspective on the history of the earth for the most part, um, the connectedness of Christ from the beginning of that creation through present day, and messengers that have been earthbound, reincarnated on earth over time, and how they're all kind of interconnected, different, but connected. So that's the goal. And in the process, I hope that we can share the, the important message of Christ, and apply that to our lives on a daily basis. So let's jump in. The books for tonight that I used, the references, are a little bit from the gospel, a lot from this, the intro in chapter 1. This book essentially talks about the evolution of the spirit, not at the individual level, but more planetary and civilization level. How worlds like Earth that are regenerative, right, um, do a lot of work, and how cultures and citizens and souls, races and things like that will evolve and change over time. It's not the easiest read, but it's a good read, and I hope you take a look at it. And then also, this is a publication from, I think, the United States Spiritist Federation. Yes, they used to put out a monthly magazine, and this was one of the issues, and I don't even know the year, but I took some material from this as well. All right. So, which side of the fence are you guys on? Right? Is it creationism or is it evolution? Um, did was there a big bang, and was it random, and science and things started to come together over time, or did God create the earth in what biblical terms say? What, 7 days or 6 days, and the seventh day he rested? Which one of these schools are we from, or what do you believe? Um, and you talk to 10 different people, you'll get 10 different answers, right? Everybody's different on this. But where does Spiritism fit into all of this? So let's start with evolution, right? Darwin came to fame, right, in 1859. Definitely, if you look at this scientifically, strictly from the physical sciences, there's an argument to be made that creation doesn't exist, right? That we all started with some type of event, and we evolved from single cell amoebas into present day humans, right? With a whole long list of science that's factual and real, that happened, right? So there's an argument to be made that there is no such thing as creation, right? It was all science. And then again, literal interpretations of the Bible, right, adhere totally to the book of Genesis, right? And in that first slide, you saw the book of Genesis according to Spiritism, right, which follows the Spiritist perspective on the creation or the evolvement of the world. And the book of Genesis from the Bible is very literal, all right, and some people take it as such. So who's right? Well, you guys know me, right? I'll tell you this. I've said this before. I think we're all wrong, right? Right? And what I mean by that is we all have, to the level of knowledge that we have today and the level of understanding, Spiritism brings a perspective, says does traditional biblical terms, as does science, right? And at our level of understanding and knowledge today, I think we have as best of an understanding as we can. But I think ultimately, as we progress through lives and evolve, I think we're going to have more information and have a better understanding of this. But the short answer is neither one of these perspectives is 100% correct. or complete, I should say. Complete is a better way to answer it, right? Not correct or wrong, but complete. So we'll talk about spiritism and how it fits into all of this. So in the beginning, right, do you ever ponder, right? Random, planned, is there a destiny? And we've talked about this before from different perspectives. From a physical, right, from a soul or a spirit standpoint, an individual entity standpoint, we've talked about this slide several times, right? God created everything, right? Each spirit the same, simple, lacking knowledge, right? In the beginning, life after life, eventually evolving into a pure spirit over time. Each at their own pace, each with their own amount of difficulty and affliction and joy, right? All based on cause and effect, and their lives being dictated by previous choices, if you will. So destiny in the sense that we're all going to evolve. Free will in the middle, right, where we control how painful, how easy, how hard, how long this process takes. There's no set. It's not like graduating from high school, right? You start in kindergarten and year after year you advance, unless you really mess up, right, and you get held back for some reason. It's not automatic. It is automatic, but we can take centuries, we can take less time or more time. Now, the same holds true for planets, right, for worlds, right? In Spiritism, we obviously believe in reincarnation, we believe in eternity of the soul, but we also believe in multiple planets, my Father's house has many homes, right, or many worlds, right? In each one of these planets, and I think this is common sense for all of us for the most part, right? For just about everybody, I think at this point in time, most of the population would tell you it's hard to fathom that we're the only intelligent life form in the world of all these planets and stars. So if you think of this in a planetary perspective and an evolution perspective, Earth is what it is, right? A regenerative planet. The spirits that inhabit the earth, right, that incarnate on the earth, are those that still have work to do. They're tied more to matter than they are to love and compassion and peace. And the spirits that come through here and evolve through here have work to do, right? As opposed to other planets that maybe they're more evolved and there's less material. Hence, all the different types of planet surfaces and worlds that exist. Make sense? All right, cool. So, what's very clear in the chapter 1 of the book is that they paint this picture of human evolution, and they talk very clearly about evolution of the world, of the planet, coming at the expense or the experience of suffering. Right? Generation after generation, race after race, how the soul or the spirit changes their clothes, right? So from life to life, who knows how many lives I've lived on earth or how many lives you've lived, but we can go way back in time, right? And if you look at civilization over time, it's changed and come and gone in a lot of ways, races, languages, all types of stuff. So they describe it as growth through affliction or growth through pain. They remind us that early organizations have passed away, of humankind have totally passed away. Just like great cities have disappeared. Races and generations, languages and cultures come and go, right? Countries, borders, sciences, religions come and go. I think about just my short, 54 years, right? How many borders have changed around the world? How many governments have changed? How many kings or dictators have changed, right? How many species of animals have gone extinct, right? Now that's just in 54 years. So think about this over millennia. And that's the point they're trying to make. The Earth and planets like it, all right, are constantly changing. Which means what? They're constantly evolving, right? Moving forward. Hey guys, how are you? Man, she's getting so big. My goodness. My goodness. All right, so is this random? Absolutely not, right? It's all part of that destiny that we talked about. As the individual spirit has a destiny, right, to evolve to perfection, so do the worlds of Earth, of the universe. Earth will not be a planet of regeneration forever. It will evolve. And as it evolves, the inhabitants that reincarnate here will be less tied to matter, more tied to love, peace, compassion. It's not stagnant. It will not stay the same. And they make clear, right, that it's not just the Earth, right, but it's all the worlds, that there's definitely an order that's established, planet to planet, and within the entire universe, and that there's these eternal ties that link each other, that link the planets, all with this master destiny of evolution. And we'll focus mostly on the Earth tonight. And the generations that comprise the stages of learning and the evolvement or the growth that happen from generation to generation. All right, on the spiritual level, Emmanuel is pretty clear here about what he calls imminent children, right? The folks that have evolved and grown into being great teachers and leaders of this planet. How they've evolved and help guide us, govern us, if you will, and not just Earth, but the various worlds of the universe. He equates them or calls them messengers, right? And we'll talk about the different messengers that have shared their time and knowledge with us on the Earth. But what he describes as messengers that travel the universe and assist with the regenerative missions of the Earth and other regenerative planets. So here on this planet, we'll talk briefly about different messengers, why, not necessarily why, but the message they had and the consistency that you'll find among all of them. So, in other words, reiterating or pointing to the fact that it's not random. There's a clear destination. There's a clear mission for the Earth. They also touch on, Emmanuel also touches on these messengers. Many of them were executed, right, for their beliefs and for their teachings, primarily due to a lack of understanding by those of the time, the incomprehension of the people that inhabited the Earth at the time when they were put down. And I like this last sentence here, right? Higher knowledge, right, perfection, although the destination, they remind us, it's slowed by troubles and affliction. So just because a messenger visits Earth and has a great message to share doesn't mean it's embraced or that the world is necessarily ready for it. And more tension, more affliction is created in the process of vetting that person, and actually ultimately the crucifixion of Christ, for example, right? Ending that life as opposed to embracing the message. And what is the message, right? What are these messengers primarily teaching? What was Christ teaching, right? That, hey, there's one God, right? No more all these different gods of fire, of dirt, of love, of drink, of dance, right? There's one God. God created all life and continues to create, right? He's not done. And all spirits are created simple, and they ultimately evolve into Christ-like perfection, that pure spirit that we talk so much about here. And that truly is the destiny of each spirit. And that's the message that a lot of these messengers were bringing. Ultimately were put to death or not really emulated or followed greatly until after their death, until after they were gone, because their message was so strong, because their message was so unique, and the people of the time just weren't necessarily ready for it. Some were, like the disciples, right? But the masses didn't follow for centuries in some cases, or a long time. All right. And then Emmanuel stresses that Jesus is one of a community of pure spirits. And I don't think that surprises anyone here. This is a difficult topic, though, outside of the center. The older I get, the more comfortable I get with what I believe, the more likely I am to talk about my beliefs. I can remember, how long have we been coming here? The twins are 12, right? So, 1999. Thank you. He's good, right? So I can remember early talks I did, when the kids were younger, a decade ago, let's say, right? I was freaked out if we broadcast, not freaked out, but I had my life here, I had my beliefs, and then I had my my other life, right? My professional life, right? So if I was speaking or if I was being promoted at the center, I was always nervous, like, oh man, what if somebody, and back then maybe because I wasn't as confident or in my career, or I relied on other professionals to feed my family, right? Because of contracts. So, I mean, God forbid if this one contract I had that traditional, evangelical Christians, for example, that own that business, if they found out I was talking about this stuff, then I'd be like part of a cult, I'm very insecure in my beliefs. But now, later in life, this is a topic that I'm not shy about. I will talk about it. I'll share my beliefs with people. And still to this day, you get pushback, right? Because what do you mean Christ is just one of a community of pure spirits? What do you mean he's not God, right? What do you mean that there's others? And God forbid you say, what? You think you're going to become a pure spirit too, right? It's a dicey subject sometimes with people. It can create some drama. So, but my point is, this is a pillar, if you will, or a foundational point of Spiritism, right? Spiritism doesn't claim that Christ is God, but Christ is the purest spirit that ever walked the earth. He visited earth physically twice. The first time at its earliest inception, right? Very early part of the creation to help plant and seed the eventual, what would become the reactions and the chemical and the physical interactions that would become the earth, right? The physical earth. And then secondly, when the world was ready to receive his gospel of love and redemption. So 2 different times. And when you have this discussion, it doesn't always go over well, right? Or what have you. All right. So in between these 2 visits, some pretty interesting things happen, right? Obviously, there were a lot of generations, a lot of reincarnation, a lot of spirits coming and going. But a very big thing happened in between these 2 visits that kind of shaped the evolution of the earth, which kind of shaped commonalities that still exist today. And that was that Christ received rebellious spirits from a planet called Capella, a very advanced planet. That planet was evolving and becoming more enlightened, right? Less material. And there was a group, a sect, inhabitants of that world, spirits that were tied to that world that weren't moving along with the rest of the inhabitants, holding them back, if you will, or not growing. So they were reincarnated to Earth, right? So what happens when you reincarnate? Do you lose your intelligence? No. Do you lose your character? No. Do you automatically become super and pure? No. You start off the next life pretty much where you were at the end of the last life. So these folks, instead of reincarnating back to Capella, reincarnated to Earth, right? And they were primarily divided among these 4 areas of Earth: the Egyptians, the Indo-Europeans, the people of Israel, and the castes of India. Very different locations, very different cultures in a lot of ways, but a ton of commonalities when we examine their spiritual and religious beliefs, right? Coming from, obviously, right, their innate evolution that they'd already experienced. So these folks, although different cultures, had very similar foundations and beliefs. So they remind us that prior to reincarnating on Earth, that Christ, they were received by Christ with welcoming words and the promise, right, that, hey, remember, this is not the end. We're going to Earth for this redemption, for your ability to help and grow and evolve. It wasn't happening fast enough. In Capella, you have this opportunity to grow, and they all had this belief, right, of a Messiah, right? So if you look back here, right, Israel, all these 4 areas talked about a Messiah coming, some type of avatar, some type of Messiah will come and save them, right? And sure enough, you see this in all of these early messengers and these early civilizations, where a promise of of someone coming to help them. Well, that didn't start here on earth, obviously, right? That started with these spirits, right? And their previous experiences. It's not new to their spirit. It was definitely new to earth at the time, but they brought it with them. So Emmanuel talks a little bit about Moses, right, and how he received the first great spiritual revelation in 1250 BC. And then Christ arrived, many years later, when humanity was prepared to receive the first notions of what have been called, right, the kingdom of heaven, or the good news, right, the gospel of Christ. But Moses received the first spiritual revelation, Christ the second, and in those 33 years, right, that Christ walked the earth, right, 0 to 33 AC, right, Christ taught human beings the code, right? Unconditional love. Forgive your enemy. Love your neighbor like yourself, right? Love God with all your heart and soul, right? And this unconditional love that guides the pure spirits, right? Christ's arrival marked the period of humanity's spiritual maturity. So we had gone through that whole period of evolution, culminating finally with Christ walking the earth, sharing his gospel with us, and promising us that a consoler would come, right? Yet another Messiah in some ways, another avatar in some ways, right? He didn't define it, he just said a consoler. And there were many along the way, right? So as far as Emmanuel's description of avatars, he talks about them being the incarnation of a person sent by God, right? He first mentions Krishna's teaching 3,000 years before Christ, and his science of self-realization. He taught self-realization of your own spirit. He mentions Lao Tzu, right, who's an enlightened spirit. He taught what's called Tao, right, or the path, Tao Te Ching, which is the book of the path and virtue, right? The more selfish you are, the more you suffer, is what he taught. Sincere words, right, are not pleasant. If I'm really honest with myself, I'm really honest with people, sometimes it's not so kind, right? The truth hurts, as they say. And that was a cornerstone of his teachings. He went on to say, right, and the pleasant ones are not necessarily sincere. If you want to receive, you must first give. And that sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Right? So did Spiritism create this stuff, or did it just continue the message, right, and share a different perspective on it? Did it lift it up or enlighten or make it easier to understand, right? Very similar to what he was teaching. Confucius, everybody knows Confucius, right? I used to think that he wrote all those things on fortune cookies, right? That they were quotes from Confucius. I was wrong, but anyways. So Confucius prepared the way for the gospel in the East, Emmanuel tells us, and he preached the human search for moral values. There's a long list there, but Confucius talked about all these: altruism, courtesy, moral knowledge, integrity, fidelity, justice. Does that sound unique to Confucius? Does not, right? Very similar to what we learn throughout Spiritism, as well as other avatars or messengers. We could look at all four of those cultures that we talked about and their spiritual books or their religious books, and all of those societies or all of those cultures and their philosophies touched on all of these things. So not unique to Spiritism at all. He went on to talk about Confucius talking about the superior person acts before they speak, right? And afterwards they speak according to their actions, right? We still have common analogies today or words of wisdom, right? He walks the walk, he talks the talk, right? All that stuff is very similar to what Confucius was saying. A superior person blames themselves, right? A common person blames others. What happens when you point your finger at somebody? Right? It's coming back to you, right? Your thumb's pointing to you. That's something that I remember learning as a kid. You shouldn't point the finger, right? Humility is the solid foundation of all virtues. Is that unique to Confucius? Absolutely not. We talk about humility, we talk about pride, we talk about ego so much here in the center. When you see a good person, emulate them. When you see a bad person, examine yourself. Right? So powerful, so strong. And not unique to Confucius. He also devotes a little bit of time to Buddha, right? And he tells us that Buddha taught the path to enlightenment to reach nirvana, which I thought was a rock band in the 90s, right? Right? But nirvana, the definition, right? The permanent union of the soul with God, right? So to reach nirvana was to be one with God. Right? His teachings are very similar to the gospel, Emmanuel tells us, right? Because the overwhelming message, right, for Buddha was practice kindness, do not create suffering. If you're hurting others, if you're causing others to suffer, then you're not practicing kindness. And a person is only noble when they can feel compassion for all creatures. There's wonderful stories about Buddhists on construction sites, right? That will stop construction to save a colony of ants, right? They'll find a way to move the ants because they don't want to hurt any living thing, right? So tons of stories like that. So a person is only noble when they can feel compassion for all creatures. So again, very similar, right, to the gospel of Christ, to the message of love and compassion and peace, right, towards your neighbor. So very similar, definitely not unique to Spiritism. So he continues with Buddha, reminding us that Buddha taught we are consequences of our thoughts. Well, is that unique to Buddhism? Absolutely not, right? We talk about our thoughts, because what do our thoughts lead to? Our words, right? We think about it, we talk about it. What happens when we start talking about it? We start to do it, right? Because we walk our talk, right? So definitely a common belief across philosophies. We are a consequence of our thoughts. What we think about winds up happening. They also, Buddha was very big on, hey, peace comes from within, right? Do not seek it around yourself, right? You've got to find peace within. External or material or things that are pleasing to our eyes or our senses, right, are not necessarily in our best interest for finding happiness or peace, right? It's got to come from within. And he's quoted here saying the origin of suffering is in the desires and illusions of passion. In other words, giving in to those things that please us, please our eyes or our senses, is also the focal point or the start or the basis of a lot of our suffering, right? Because when we're doing things that are pleasing to the eyes or pleasing to the senses, it's not necessarily the best for the people around us per se or morally upright. So we bring a lot of this suffering onto us because of those illusions of passion. All right, so that's Buddha. How about Socrates? Remember him? What did he tell us? Was it him that said, know thyself? Right, I think. What's interesting about Socrates, he didn't write anything down, right? Plato wrote all this stuff, right? So Plato was a student of Socrates, and a lot of the stuff we attribute to Socrates was written by Plato. But Socrates, at certain times, Emmanuel tells us that his life truly exemplified Christ. Not entirely, but there were times in his life when he truly exemplified Christ. And that the teachings of Socrates, written by Plato, prepared the way for the gospel in the West. And there are a lot of messages from Socrates that are definitely consistent with Christ's teachings. Specifically, right, the immortality of the soul, purification, and self-knowledge. We learn and believe heavily that the knowledge that we acquire, right, because of our actions and our experiences and our choices, truly guide where we go and what happens, right? That whole cause and effect type of a thing. Socrates, Emmanuel goes on to tell us, bless you, goes on to tell us that the most important human quest is that of moral perfection, right? That's Socrates' belief. Well, is it any different here in Spiritism? Absolutely not, right? Moral perfection is our destiny. It is our destination. A life without challenges is not worth living, and there's only one good knowledge and only one evil, ignorance, right? So that's very powerful. He's also quoted as saying, wise is he that knows the limits of his own ignorance, right? There's a business book called The Peter Principle, and it's all about getting promoted or being as successful up until your weakest attribute, right? Your biggest flaw, and then it just kind of ends, right? And it reminds me of this, right? We how often are we aware enough to know what we don't know, or to know the limits of our ignorance? And we learn, right, over time. I'm much less cocky today than I was when I was 21, right, or 31, right? I know now the limits of my ignorance in a lot of ways. And then knowing thyself, it's never over, right? We're always learning. We always have that ability to continue knowing thyself. All right, just another hour, okay, guys? We're almost there. So then, chapter 25, and this ties into the Gospel 101 magazine cover that I showed you, coming from chapter 25 of the Gospel according to Spiritism. It's entitled "The Gospel in the Future." And this talk, it's a very modest summary of history, right? And it enables one to see the eternal ties that connect all of the generations in the evolutionary process of the planet. And that connection is indeed Christ. As we've talked about these different avatars and these different messengers, and we go back to the very beginning, right, of the earth and Christ's role in that, it's very clear that his influence, his governing, his ability to help guide us is clear over all these different phases of time and all these different cultures, because of a lot of the commonalities of those different philosophies that are consistent with Christ's message. Not only his message, right, and being connected, but also the love and dedication of Christ is very evident, and they spend a lot of time in that chapter talking about that. So what is the love and destination of Christ, right? What does Emmanuel tell us here? Is it that it's present since the earliest beginnings, right? As matter was forming to the dawn of humanity, when conquering nature was the solution. Remember, if we think about the early humans, if you will, the dawn of our more modern civilization, what was our biggest concerns? Survival, right? And instinctual. We had to eat. We had to not die, right? We had to not get eaten or attacked, and we had to reproduce, right? We had to carry on the species, and that's all we had to worry about back in the day, right? Ultimately, though, rising, right, to spiritual adulthood, proclaimed by wise Greeks and Romans, culminating, of course, with the coming of Christ, and obviously his promise of a consoler. So we go through this instinctual phase where it's all about physical survival, right? And we still, as humans, right, we still have some of that in our DNA and in our mindset, right? There's a lot of that fight or flight, right, of our limbic system. It's real. And how often do we react out of instinct, right, as opposed to enacting what we know from Christ's teaching? We're still going through that process where we're not necessarily, where we're still tied to that animal or that instinct, as opposed to what we know might be better solutions. But over time, that's changing. So Christ comes, right? He walks the earth and he gives us his message. And now, 2,000 plus years later, little by little, we are embracing this. I mean, the world is definitely a more peaceful place today than it was just 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Still violent, still afflicted with vice in a lot of ways, and greed, but definitely much less violent than it was previously. So little by little, we're making progress. And Christ obviously promised us the consoler that would come as well, right? Christ, again, Emmanuel's teaching us here, reminding us, I should say, that Christ is a pure spirit. And any pure spirit, not just Christ, has no required need to reincarnate, right? Christ did not have to come to earth, right? Christ did not have to take on that mission, right? To endure hardships of human life, to be antagonized and killed like many of these messengers were, doing it solely out of his love for us, right? And in the process left us with his gospel, right? The eternal message of love. And the beauty of this, right, is that message is eternal. It's ongoing. You can see how it is intertwined with across the globe, across cultures, and how that message is ultimately being fulfilled or evolving into reality, not just for individual spirits, but for the planet as a whole. Right? So I just put this slide up one last time, because when we think about the 33 years that he walked the earth, right, and what culminated in the last couple of years that has changed humanity or stayed with humanity for these 2,000 plus years. There's a definition, right, of being a Christian, right, that many people have. There's also awareness of being a Christian, right? People that aren't Christians, right? If you talk to 90% of the population on the earth, they all know Christ's story. Some believe, some don't, right? But if you asked any of those people, if you didn't mention Christ, but you described how Christ lived, or you described his message on how to live, and you asked them, right, would the world be a better place if we lived like that? What do you think most people would answer? Absolutely, right? So whether you believe in Christ, whether you're a Spiritism, a Muslim, a Jew, an atheist, right? But you described the attributes of Christ, the way he lived, the example that he set for us. And you said, hey, what do you think? Would the world be a better place? No doubt, right? Being completely honest, it'd be 100%, right? It'd be amazing, right? So in his 33 years, all right, he left us with this enduring code, if you will, this unconditional love, right? That he carried with him and demonstrated to us with the way he let his life end, right? He could have ended that. He could have stopped that. He did not have to do that. And that example of the way he lived truly guides us, should guide us, should be our example. And it definitely marks the arrival period of a human maturity where we were ready to receive a bigger message, right? It wasn't an eye for an eye or survival anymore. It was now about raising up morally, helping our fellow man, lifting not only ourselves, but the world itself. And that promised consoler, right, comes to us in the form of the Spiritist doctrine, right? Not anything new, right? Not a reinvention or a recreation of history, but rather the next step in perspective on this, where the messengers, right, have been able to give us more. I left it over there, but the next book I'm going to read is Heaven and Hell. I'm at this point in life where no matter how much I try, right, and study and live righteously or correctly or morally upright, I feel like I still take 2 steps back, right? I move 3 steps forward and then I go back 2 steps. Sometimes I go back 5 steps and then I catch up, right? It's almost like I'm on this string, you know, this self-imposed seesaw in some ways. So what I've realized now, what's really hitting home for me in this whole process, in addition to what I see in my children, and I won't bore you too much with my personal story, but now that I'm a parent and I've got kids that are preteen or teenagers, I'm starting to see repetition in lessons that I was taught, right? As way back as from my years as a Catholic, right, in catechism, or lessons of my father, things that he did or said. And I'm starting to see that I have this ability to shape how my children look at the world. And I don't know, maybe, I'm sure I'm not alone, but for me, it's like the biggest weight on my shoulders, the biggest responsibility I've ever felt. Because what I do from here on out for just a couple more years is going to shape them for the rest of their life, right? And what I learned recently through this process is I can read any book you give me from cover to cover, and rationally I can acquire it, right? But what I'm finding is personal stories of people that have gone before me are having the most profound impact on me changing my behavior. So I bought Heaven and Hell tonight because I know I've got 3 copies of this book someplace, but I just can't find them. So I bought Heaven and Hell tonight because it's full of stories of spirits that share their examples, right? Their life, their mistakes, their successes. So that's where I'm going to focus my attention going forward is trying to experience their stories by reading about them, because that seems to shape me better and help me make changes. I'm not suggesting you have to do the same, but my point is we're at this point as a planet, and many of us as people, right, as spirits, myself included, where we have to make choices every day, right? You're here on a Thursday night, right? You could be doing anything else, right? But you're here, and I believe that's because you want to grow and you want to improve, or you're going through a troubling time that you're looking for help and assistance, right? So what I offer to you tonight is that book that we talked about and the evolution on the way to the light of the human experience of the globe, of the earth, and how Christ influenced that. What I offer you tonight is that each of you have the opportunity to accept that into your hearts and your minds, and however you rationalize that, or however you can make that stick. For me, it's the stories in Heaven and Hell, right, or other people's explanation to me of what they did wrong and how they overcome, or what they would do differently. For you, it might be something from the gospel. What I'm suggesting to you is we each have the ability, the power, the gift, right, to grow. And we can do it slowly and against our will, or we can embrace it and make it faster. So however you do that, I would encourage you to start today. And thank you for your time and attention, and enduring my personal story at the end here. I don't know if it helped, but I feel lighter. So thank you for listening. Thank you so much, and please go in peace tonight. Oh, and before I forget, there's a note up here. We need water donation. So if you can find it in your heart to maybe pick up a case of water and bring it next time, we could really use some water. Thank you so much.